The prosecutor's voice cut through the air like a knife, sharp and unyielding, as he said my name, Nathalia Rivera. A weight settled in my chest, making it hard to draw a breath. I was a 37-year-old gunnery sergeant in the U.S. Marine Corps, and yet all I could think about were the whispers from my family that echoed in the back of my mind, "She's just a college dropout." The humiliation of those words wrapped around me tighter than my dress uniform, a reminder of how far I had come and how easily it could all be stripped away. As I sat there in the crowded courtroom, under the sharp gaze of the judge and the stern faces of the jury, my heart raced, an erratic drumbeat that matched the tension in the room. I clenched my fists beneath the table, feeling the smooth skin of my palms grow damp with sweat. A small part of me wanted to stand up and shout, to remind everyone that I had fought hard for my rank and my place in this world. But as I glanced at the faces around me, my family, friends, and colleagues, I could see the doubt etched in their expressions. The whispers had become a frigid storm, battering against my resolve. Each accusing glance was a reminder that, despite my uniform and rank, I was still perceived as the girl who couldn't hack it in college, the woman who had somehow failed to meet expectations. The trial itself felt surreal, like I was watching a movie unfold where I wasn't the hero but rather the reluctant villain. I had always prided myself on my dedication and sacrifice to my country, the myriad late nights spent training, the physical toll etched on my body. But now, I was here, thrust into this daunting legal battle over an incident that made me feel like I was being stripped of every accomplishment I had fought for. The Marine Corps had not trained me for this, being the subject of public scrutiny and doubt. I wanted to scream that I was still that same Nathalia, still dedicated, still strong. But with every question posed, every piece of evidence laid bare, I felt as though I was losing pieces of myself. As the prosecutor laid out the details of the case, each word a brick added to an already high wall between me and my past, I felt nausea creep in. My thoughts spiraled, focusing on the consequences of what was happening, not just for me but for an entire community. My brothers and sisters in arms were watching closely, and their opinions mattered more than anything. Would they see me as just another statistic, another Marine who had let her guard down? Or could they trust that I was more than what this moment defined me to be? I wished I could reach out and touch someone I trusted, someone who would anchor me amidst the chaos, but I was alone, ensnared in the jaws of this courtroom. I took a deep breath, willing myself to remember that I had faced tougher situations before. Commanding my troops in the heat of battle had not prepared me for this, but I had learned resilience in the face of adversity. I fought for those who believed in me and for every Marine who might feel the weight of my actions. I had to reclaim my narrative, to show them that I was not just a college dropout, but a woman who had succeeded against all odds, who had stood tall among the fiercest. As I prepared to respond to the prosecutor's accusations, I felt a flicker of determination stirring within me. Before I go on, subscribe to the channel. Here, we tell the untold stories of military women, courage, sacrifice, and truth. Your support helps more voices like mine be heard. I sat in the courtroom, the weight of everyone's eyes pressing down on me like a 100-pound pack. The air was thick with tension, a cocktail of anxiety and judgment. I glanced around, searching for a familiar face, but all I saw were strangers whispering behind their hands, my heart racing in rhythm with the murmured gossip floating around. "She's just a college dropout," they'd say, dismissing me like a faulty piece of equipment, ignoring the years of service and sacrifice that led me here. My uniform, once a source of pride, felt like an anchor dragging me deeper into an abyss where I was nothing more than a statistic. The prosecutor stood, towering over the podium with a confidence that made my insides churn. His voice rang out, sharp and accusatory as he articulated each detail of the case against me, painting a picture of a reckless gunnery sergeant who had lost her way. I clenched my fists, the nails biting into my palms, trying to channel that familiar Marine discipline, but anger bubbled beneath the surface. Do they even know what it's like, I thought, to carry the weight of responsibility for the lives of others? To lead those who rely on you day in and day out, all while battling your own demons? It felt so unjust that the very attributes that had defined my service in the Corps now served as fodder for their narrative. I remembered the day it all spiraled, a chaotic blur of events that felt like a bad dream. I had been enlisted, focused on my mission, my comrades, and the rigorous training we endured together. But then life threw a curveball, my mother's illness. It was more than just a family crisis, it felt like a battleground where I was forced to choose between duty and blood. This trial, the ramifications of a single poor decision in a moment of desperation, threatened to overshadow everything I had ever accomplished. The prosecutor's words twisted memories that should have been cherished into weapons against me, their sharp edges cutting deeper than I thought possible. My eyes flicked to the jury, a mix of faces that seemed to reflect their own biases, their own experiences, or lack thereof. I could see wariness in their eyes. They didn't know what it meant to put your life on the line, to stand in the face of fear day after day. Each of them had a story, but here, I was just a page in a legal book. The more the prosecutor unraveled my life, the more I felt like a stranger in my own skin. I was angry, yes, but I was also terrified. This was not just about me anymore, it was about the integrity of my service, the trust my fellow Marines placed in me, and the very fabric of who I was. As I sat there, a knot of worry and regret forming in my throat, I vowed that I wouldn't let them define me. I wouldn't allow their whispers to dictate the narrative of my life. I had fought so hard to create a path worthy of respect, one built not on labels but on the struggles I had faced and the strength I had mustered. I was more than just a college dropout, I was a gunnery sergeant who had faced challenges that pushed me to my limits and beyond. This moment would not be my end, but rather the beginning of a battle that required every ounce of courage I had left to reclaim my story. The gavel struck with a resounding thud that echoed in my chest more than in the wooden court. Nathalia. My name had never sounded so foreign, so heavy. The air around me thickened, and I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room boring into me, scrutinizing my every breath. It was as if that one word had reached back in time, unearthing memories I had believed were buried beneath the weight of my uniform, the camaraderie, and the discipline of military life. I clenched my fists, willing myself to focus. I'd been trained to face worse than this, but those lessons felt distant now, and all I could think of was how to keep my head above water. All eyes were on me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being a child again, sitting on the cold linoleum floor of our cramped living room, listening to my family whisper about me behind closed doors. She's just a college dropout. The words sliced through me with the same sharpness as any blade I'd held. It was almost as if they were saying I was a failure, that my worth was tied solely to that piece of paper I never earned. Those whispers echoed years of feeling like I never quite fit into the mold they had crafted for me, like I was constantly trying to prove my value, my existence, by pouring my soul into the Marines. But even there, amidst the honor and brotherhood, I often felt like an outsider, a fleeting shadow in a world that seemed to thrive on conformity. My thoughts spiraled back to the day I left college, clutching my backpack filled with textbooks and a heart heavy with uncertainty. I had thought joining the Corps would fill the void, would reshape me into something more than a statistic. But there I was, sitting in a courtroom, the weight of my choices pressing down on me. I could still hear my mother's sharp intake of breath when I told her I was enlisting. I could picture her face, a mix of concern and disappointment, as she wondered why her daughter couldn't just find a normal life. They never understood that it wasn't about rebelling, it was about wanting to serve, to give my life purpose. Yet, in this moment, I felt that purpose slipping through my fingers like sand. The prosecutor's voice droned on, but it felt muted, filtered through a haze of my recollections. I could see the moments of pride I'd experienced in my career, the fierce loyalty I'd forged with my brothers and sisters in arms, the sense of accomplishment I felt every time I wore my dress blues. Yet, juxtaposed against that was a shame that threatened to drown me. Was I really just a college dropout in the eyes of the world? Was there anything in my life that could redeem the decisions that had led me here, facing charges that seemed to strip away every ounce of dignity I had fought so hard to uphold? As the moments ticked by in that courtroom, I felt my heart racing, a drumbeat of anxiety matching the relentless thoughts in my head. I was no stranger to conflict, but being placed on this stage felt like a battlefield unlike any I had ever faced. Each second was a test of will, a challenge that pushed me to confront the very demons I had hoped to outrun. I couldn't allow the whispers of my past to consume me. Instead, I needed to remember the strength I had built, the resilience hammered into me through countless drills and challenges. With a deep breath, I grasped onto those memories, willing them to guide me through this unforgiving trial. I didn't know what the outcome would be, but I knew I was more than just a title or a moment of weakness. I was a gunnery sergeant, and I wouldn't back down without a fight. I remember the day my family gathered in the living room, the air thick with tension. My father leaned back in his worn recliner, arms crossed, his scowl more pronounced than usual. A college dropout, he had muttered, his voice barely a whisper but sharp enough to slice through the silence. I sat on the edge of the couch, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on me like a 100-pound rucksack. My dreams, meticulously planned over late-night study sessions and endless coffee runs, suddenly felt trivial in the harsh light of my family's expectations. My mother had tried to defend me, her gentle words like a soft blanket over a cold reality. She just needed to find her way, she said, but her eyes reflected the disappointment of a parent who had hoped for more. Those words stung. I could see the conversation play out in their expressions, the unspoken judgments flickering like shadows around us. I had enlisted in the Marine Corps, not out of rebellion, but from a deep-seated desire to serve. A longing to find purpose, to prove to myself that I was capable of more than what my family believed I could accomplish. As a gunnery sergeant now, I fit into a world where accountability mattered above all else, where actions spoke louder than the whispers of family judgment. But that day, I felt like an outsider in my own home. The tales of family pride were infused with expectations I had never quite met. I was no longer the bright-eyed student with potential. Instead, I was the daughter who had traded lectures for boot camp, who had exchanged textbooks for M16s. I sometimes wondered if they saw me as a failure, someone who had strayed from the path they had meticulously laid out for me. The memories of my training flooded back, the discipline and camaraderie that brought me strength in the face of self-doubt. It was hard, grueling even, yet every moment shaped me into the woman I became. There were times I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, anxious about how my choices might echo back home. I longed for their approval, but the fear of being seen as the family disappointment stung deeper than any physical trial I had faced in those tough early weeks. I had to remind myself that serving my country was not a failure, it was a different kind of success, one that wouldn't necessarily make sense to them. Then came the day in court, when the prosecutor read my name aloud. I could almost hear my mother's hushed voice and my father's heavy sigh. Suddenly, I wasn't just Nathalia, I was the embodiment of every judgment they had passed on me. Those memories, the echoes of their disdain, surged through me, igniting a blend of shame and anger. I had fought for my place in a world that often dismissed women like me, and now I stood at the center of conflict, not for the sake of my family's approval or my own pride, but in defense of what I believed was right. In that moment, I realized that I was still a work in progress, navigating a battlefield that was as much internal as it was external. My family's whispers would always be a part of my narrative, but they wouldn't define me. I would rise, not just from this conflict but from the shadows of expectations that cast doubt on my path. My journey was mine to own, and no amount of familial scrutiny could diminish the strength I had built through every challenge I had faced, both in uniform and out. The air in the courtroom hangs heavy, thick with a mix of anxiety and anticipation, as I sit rigidly in my seat. My hands tremble slightly in my lap, the papers I'm gripping crumpling under the pressure. I've always been taught to maintain composure, to stand tall under scrutiny, to hold fast to the pride that comes with my rank. But here, surrounded by strangers' whispers and the weight of my family's judgment still fresh in my mind, I grapple with an unsettling feeling of inadequacy. My eyes drift towards the prosecutor, who's flipping through pages, preparing to call me up. My heart races. It's not just about the case anymore, it feels like my entire life is at stake. The prosecutor finally speaks my name, and my heart drops. I rise slowly, every muscle in my body screaming to back down, to hide away from the critical gazes that follow me. They see a college dropout, a girl who once had dreams of becoming a lawyer and is now just a gunnery sergeant turned suspect. The whispers, the doubts, they echo in my ears, each one a reminder of my past choices, reminding me of the people who never believed I could rise above. With every step I take to the witness stand, I can almost hear my family's voices betraying their disbelief, their condescension that lingers even now. As I sit, I have to force myself to breathe. I think of the Marines I've trained, the missions I've led, the lives I've impacted. I want to scream, I'm not just some dropout. But instead, I swallow hard, gathering my thoughts. I know I must present my case with clarity and poise, a reflection of the strength I've cultivated over years of service. The truth matters more than my fear. I can't let their perceptions mold my reality. I have to rise above, if not for them, then for myself. I'm ready to prove that I am worthy, that I have fought for something greater than opinions and assumptions. The prosecutor questions me, and I answer with tight precision. I talk about my role during training exercises, recounting the incidents that led to the charges. Each word is a struggle, but I cling to the notion that I have lived a life of purpose. I have driven trucks laden with supplies through hostile territory and stood guard at checkpoints while others slept. Those experiences have forged me into someone who can withstand scrutiny, someone who understands the weight of responsibility. As I speak, I flick my gaze to the jury, hoping they can see beyond the stigma attached to my past, that maybe they can recognize the woman standing before them as something more significant than a label. When I finish, I sit back in my chair, my heart still pounding but filled with a flicker of pride. I've survived this far, I can do it again. The whispers may continue, but I've learned to quiet them with evidence of my skills, my achievements, and my commitment. This moment, I tell myself silently, is not just a chance to clear my name, it's about redefining my worth. I'm more than my past mistakes. I am a gunnery sergeant, a woman who has faced her fears and overcome them. Tomorrow, I'll either emerge vindicated or not, but today, I reclaim my narrative. I owe it to myself, and I won't let anyone rewrite my story. I stood at the rear of the courtroom, the weight of the moment settling heavily on my shoulders. My palms were slick with sweat as I gripped the back of the wooden bench, glancing around at the familiar faces of my family. Their worried expressions said it all. They had whispered behind my back for years, referring to me in judgmental tones as just a college dropout. But here I was, a gunnery sergeant, with everything I had worked for hanging in the balance. I'd traded my college dreams for discipline and a sense of purpose, and the irony of being in a court of law was not lost on me. It felt like a final exam I never studied for, with the stakes higher than ever. When the prosecutor rose and called my name, something inside me shifted. It wasn't the fear I felt before, it was a fierce resolve. They had no idea of the sacrifices I'd made, the weight I carried daily as a woman in a field dominated by men. The glares and whispers of my family echoed in my mind, but I pushed them aside. I had stood shoulder to shoulder with some of the best and bravest in the Marine Corps, and if they could face the enemy on foreign shores, I could face this. My heart raced as I took my place in front of the jury, each step a reminder of the commitment I held beyond myself. As I began to speak, I felt the tension in the courtroom shift. I wasn't just recounting the events that had led me here, I was reclaiming my story. I shared my experiences, the battles fought not just overseas but within myself. I was raw and vulnerable, but it felt liberating to stand up for who I was. The judge, the jurors, even the prosecutor, I could see them leaning in, listening. In that moment, I wasn't just a dropout with a tarnished past, I was a gunnery sergeant who had seen the realities of life and death, who had learned resilience in the most arduous of circumstances. This testimony wasn't merely about dispelling the misconceptions my family held. It was about proving to myself that I was more than what they saw. While I recounted the pride I felt in my service, the camaraderie I built with my fellow Marines, I could see the nods of understanding settle amongst some of the jurors. They were beginning to see the truth of my strength. Digging deep, I spoke candidly about the self-doubt that had plagued me, even about the days I questioned my decision to leave college, a choice that had ignited so many criticisms. But my life had been defined not by my education alone, it was enriched by the grit of serving a cause greater than myself. As I stepped back from the stand, the gravity of what I had done washed over me. I had faced my fears, my family's whispers, and the societal judgments about being a woman in a traditionally male role. The courtroom felt different now, less hostile and more like a place of healing. No longer was I just the college dropout, I was Nathalia, a woman who had risen through the ranks of the Marine Corps, who had fought her own battles and emerged stronger. I realized then that overcoming wasn't just about proving my worth to others but affirming it to myself. I held my head high, ready to confront whatever came next, embracing the scars that had shaped me into the woman I had become. The courtroom felt cavernous, the air thick with anticipation. I could hardly breathe as I waited for the judge to call my name, my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. It was almost comical, how I had prepared for every imaginable scenario, from my basic training days in the Marines to more recent leadership roles. Yet, here I sat, a gunnery sergeant, a title earned through grit and determination, feeling small and vulnerable under the harsh fluorescent lights. My family's whispers echoed in my mind, "She's just a college dropout." Those words had lodged themselves deep, twisting themselves into my identity, making this moment feel like a singular representation of my worth. I never intended to drop out. Life tossed me from one challenge to another, and the Marine Corps had been my refuge. The decisive moment came when I realized I could no longer balance the weight of college, a job, and the demands of family obligations. I chose service over a degree, a choice that brought me pride, but that also came with a set of judgments from those who only saw the surface. I became thick-skinned, using the disdain from those around me as fuel. I turned my back on naysayers, determined to carve out a trajectory that defied their expectations. The truth is, I've accomplished more without a degree than many do with one, yet snippets of that old narrative still haunt me. The prosecutor's voice sliced through my thoughts like a knife. "Nathalia Garcia, would you please stand?" My legs felt like lead as I rose, a mix of indignation and fear coursing through me. I was more than a college dropout, I was a Marine who had navigated deployments, trained recruits, and stood shoulder to shoulder with the best in my field. Yet, here I was, equated with failures, my past treated like an anchor instead of a launching pad. I fought against the urge to shrink into myself. I had grown and evolved, developed my own armor against the challenges life threw at me. As the prosecutor began recounting the evidence, I felt my pulse quicken. Each word was a reminder of how far I had come. The relentless hours spent honing my skills in the field, the bravery it took to put my life on the line, it all started to drown out those years of doubt. I took a deep breath, focusing on the strength I cultivated in moments of adversity. I remembered the faces of my brothers and sisters in arms. They had seen the value in me when I couldn't see it myself. I fought for them, and I realized that, regardless of how this moment was portrayed, I was still standing. I was still here. Standing in that courtroom, I felt a surge of resolve. I was no longer just a reflection of what others thought I was an embodiment of perseverance, a testament to the strength of spirit required to survive and thrive amidst chaos. I'd faced down fears in combat, confronted obstacles in training, and now, I would rise above this moment as well. I owed that to myself and to the many people back home who had supported me. I had transformed my challenges into stepping stones, each one a testament to my growth, resilience, and undeniable strength. The narrative wouldn't end here, it would only evolve. With a newfound clarity, I steeled myself as I faced the judge. I was prepared to articulate my truth, to tell my story, not just as a dropout, but as someone who had forged an identity in service, who had refused to let circumstance define her. I would not allow their whispers to drown out the voice of a gunnery sergeant who had earned every scar along the way. This was not just about survival, it was about thriving. The whispers may linger, but so would my resolve to rise above them. I sat in the courtroom, the air thick with tension, the faint rustle of paper like the sound of distant gunfire. As I waited for the prosecutor to continue, I felt the weight of my family's judgment on my shoulders. They'd whispered their disappointment behind closed doors, their belief that I had squandered my future. Just a college dropout, they'd say, as if the two words could erase the years of sweat and sacrifice I'd poured into my life. The uniform I wore was meant to shield me from their scorn, but it felt more like an anchor dragging me down into the depths of their disapproval. It was the prosecutor's voice that pierced through the haze, calling my name with a dispassionate clarity that sent shivers down my spine. My heart raced. I could feel the eyes of the courtroom boring into me, each gaze a reminder of my fall from grace. I had fought for my honor in many battles throughout my career, but I never imagined that I would find myself on this side of a courtroom. I clenched my fists, the rings of my service wearing heavy against my skin, grounding me even as memories threatened to surface. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in the field, the smell of gunpowder mingling with the sweat and the ever-looming sense of dread. Each mission had brought its own trials, the exhilaration of survival intertwining with the gnawing fear of loss. But nothing prepared me for the day I lost Ryan. He was my best friend, my confidant, and that familiar sense of camaraderie turned to ash the moment the news reached me. I could still hear the words echoing in my mind, "He didn't make it." I had failed to protect him in the way I swore I always would. They didn't understand. My family never could. They saw my decisions as reckless and cowardly, tied to a past they deemed unnecessary. In their eyes, I was a girl who had thrown away an education for a uniform and a battlefield. Yet military life had forged me, taught me resilience and sacrifice, and, above all, how to stand up in the face of overwhelming odds. I had earned my rank, clawed my way up, but all they saw was a girl they didn't recognize anymore. I could feel their whispers, still ringing in my ears, blending with the prosecutor's voice as they made their case against me, painting my choices as irresponsible and reckless. As I stood up to face the judge, I took a deep breath and reminded myself of who I was. I was Nathalia, a gunnery sergeant with scars that told stories of battles fought, not just against the enemy but also against the doubts I faced daily, even from those I loved. I was here to defend not just my actions, but my integrity, my commitment to the path I chose. This trial wasn't just about a moment of weakness, it was about confronting a past that still haunted me. I wouldn't let their judgments define me, I had survived too much to back down now. The truth would be my ally, and as I met the judge's gaze, I steeled myself, finding strength in knowing I would fight for my honor, once and for all. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker, and I could hardly focus on the prosecutor's words as they echoed in my ears. I never thought I'd find myself sitting there, under glaring lights, surrounded by faces that held both curiosity and judgment. They whispered about me, their thoughts unfiltered and loud, despite the silence plastered over the room. "She's just a college dropout," someone muttered, dismissing my accomplishments as if they were mere footnotes in a life they deemed unworthy. I felt every syllable like a punch to the gut, as if my choices were suddenly reduced to nothing more than a regretful blip on the radar of time. When I enlisted, it was a decision weighed with clarity, one that came from a place deep within me. Each day I put on my uniform, I stepped into a world that demanded respect and discipline, two things I had always sought in my life. But in this moment, I felt stripped of that dignity. No amount of training could prepare me for the way people would reduce me simply to the label of dropout. The men and women I served within the Corps understood grit, understood sacrifice. They knew that life wasn't about shiny degrees hanging on walls but about resilience and fortitude. Yet there I sat, drowning in a sea of misconceptions, as if my rank and my experiences counted for nothing outside the battleground. I stole a glance at my former colleagues, friends who had come to support me, their eyes filled with a mix of empathy and understanding. I wouldn't trade them for any diploma. They had seen me in the trenches, facing challenges that would have made others crumble. We had shared sweat and tears under unyielding pressure, and they recognized me for who I was, a gunnery sergeant molded by the crucible of our service, not a statistic to be measured by another's standards of success. I wanted to reach out, to connect with them, to gather strength from their presence in that moment that felt all too isolating. As the prosecutor finally said my name, I felt a mix of horror and defiance coil in my chest. The way they emphasized my past made it sound more like an accusation. In each syllable lay the suggestion that I was somehow lesser, the implication that I had failed not just myself but everybody who ever believed in me. But deep down, I still carried the knowledge that my worth wasn't defined by a diploma. I had learned to lead troops, manage crises, and stand tall amidst storms of adversity, skills that academics couldn't quantify. I was more than their narrative, and I refused to let it crush me. The whispers faded into the background as I prepared to speak, drawing strength from both my journey and my comrades' unwavering support. I had served my country with honor, and I was more than capable of facing this challenge head-on. The Marine Corps had taught me to stand firm in the face of adversity, to embrace challenges rather than shy away from them. I would prove not just to the courtroom but also to myself that my life's value extended far beyond a conventional path. I took a deep breath, steady and resolute, prepared to reclaim my narrative, to carve my identity anew amidst the shadows of doubt. I sat in the courtroom, the air thick with judgment, my heart pounding to the tempo of dread. The prosecutor's words echoed in the cavernous room, each syllable like a gunshot, piercing the quiet. "Nathalia," he called, my name hanging in the air, heavy with scorn. It wasn't just my name they were calling out. It felt as if they were summoning every doubt, every whisper I'd ever heard about myself. I clenched my fists at my sides, trying to quell the surge of anger rising within me. Despite my years in uniform, the accolades, and the respect I'd earned, all I could hear were the whispers of my family, words of disappointment and shame. A college dropout, they'd said. A reckless decision-maker, they'd insinuated. It made the stares of strangers in this room feel even sharper. The prosecutor droned on about decisions I'd made, painting my past in shades of failure. I felt exposed, stripped of the armor I wore every day in service. I'd never imagined that this moment, laden with accusation, would be where my dual identities collided so sharply. The young woman from my past, the one who struggled to find her place in a world that often said she didn't belong, sat shoulder to shoulder with the sergeant I had become. How could they possibly understand what it meant to fight, to sacrifice, to push through the adversity that had cast a long shadow over my youth? I was more than just a label, more than just a story. I was a warrior, yet here I was, standing trial for choices I'd made in the name of survival. When it was my turn to speak, I felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on me, each one searching for answers, waiting for me to justify my existence. "You don't know me," I said, my voice steady but laced with emotion. "You don't know what it was like to make the choices I've had to make." The judge regarded me with a mix of skepticism and curiosity, an expression I had long since learned to recognize. I took a deep breath, anchoring myself in the memories of my years of service, the way I'd fought tooth and nail for respect, for a voice, for inclusion. I owed it to myself and the woman I used to be, to speak my truth. As I continued, the words flowed like bullets from a fully loaded magazine, each one aimed at the heart of the prosecution's case. I joined the Marines not as a premise of rebellion or to negate my education but as a commitment to serve my country, to protect the very freedoms some of you take for granted. I could see the judge's brow furrow, the jurors shifting uncomfortably in their seats. I wasn't just fighting for my reputation, I was fighting for all the young women who had been dismissed as mere dropouts or failures, the ones who had chosen the more arduous path of resilience. I wanted them to hear me, to feel the weight of what it meant to redefine oneself in a world that often only sees labels. The confrontation was raw, a battle not just against the accusations but against a narrative that had been written long before I stepped foot in that courtroom. And while my heart raced with every unanswered question and every lingering doubt, I felt something shift inside me. I couldn't change the past, I couldn't erase the whispers that once haunted me. But as I stood there, I realized that I was no longer just the college dropout my family whispered about. I was a gunnery sergeant, a warrior of the Marine Corps, and I would use my voice not just for myself but for every whisper that had been snuffed out by ignorance. Today, I would reclaim my story. The courtroom buzzed with a tension that felt like a clenching fist around my throat. I sat there, my stomach churning as I listened to the prosecutor lay out the case against me. Each word they spoke seemed to slice through the air as if they were daggers aimed at my very being. "She's just a college dropout," they had said. I could practically hear the whispers of my family echoing in my head, their disappointment suffocating me from the inside. College was never my priority, the Marines were. I had always known that my path was different, but in that moment, it felt like the whole world was against me, simplifying my life's choices into a neat little package that didn't even come close to capturing who I truly was. Every time I glanced at the jury, I felt the weight of their gazes surveying me like I was a specimen under a microscope. I wasn't their daughter or their sister. I was a gunnery sergeant in the Marines, someone trained to face combat and lead young men and women into battle. Even so, all they saw was a woman sitting in a chair, accused of something I had never done. It infuriated me, the way my family's skepticism had infiltrated their minds. They couldn't know what it was like to have to fight for every ounce of respect and recognition in a world that often dismissed women in uniform. I felt an acute sense of sorrow that they had reduced me to just a label, something they could gossip about over dinner instead of understanding the complexities of my journey. The prosecutor's voice droned on, painting a picture of a reckless and irresponsible individual who had thrown away her life. I could see my mother's face, pale and etched with worry, as she sat in the front row next to my father. Their shame was palpable, the way they shifted in their seats, unable to look straight at me. I wanted to scream that I wasn't a failure. I had chosen a different form of service, a different commitment to my country. But the weight of their judgment made the words stick in my throat. I was fighting a much bigger battle here, not just for my reputation, but for their understanding and acceptance of my choices. As the trial dragged on, I caught glimpses of my brother's face. He had always been my closest ally, the one who understood the fire in my spirit. But now, he appeared torn, caught between familial loyalty and the overwhelming pressure of societal expectations. I could only imagine the conversations happening behind closed doors, the doubts settling in like smoke in a confined space. I craved validation, yet all I received were uncertain glances and hushed tones that fed into my growing sense of isolation. I realized in that moment that even those who loved me could be influenced by their perceptions of success, and it bruised my heart. When the moment finally came for the judge to deliver the conclusion, I braced myself. I had spent so long preparing for this, with my training ingrained in me, the belief that resilience would see me through any storm. But as the gavel came down, and the verdict echoed through the chamber, the pain of their response pierced me deeper than I had anticipated. It felt like the final nail in a coffin of dreams I had dared to build. I wasn't just fighting against a prosecution, I was up against the very fabric of my identity as a woman in the military, stripped down to mere labels by those who were supposed to understand me. The world outside would never truly know who I was, but now, the world inside my family felt like it was crumbling, scattering the remnants of my hope into the abyss. Standing in that courtroom today, I felt the weight of the world shift off my shoulders. The whispers of my family had haunted me like ghosts, lingering in every corner of my mind. "She's just a college dropout," they said, as if the absence of a degree could strip away the strength built from years of service, the grit that carried me through boot camp, and the resilience I forged through adversity. I channeled the voices of those who doubted me into determination, each word morphing into a shield against their judgment. I was not just Nathalia, the girl who left university. I was Nathalia, the gunnery sergeant of the U.S. Marine Corps. I had earned every title that mattered through sweat, courage, and sacrifice, and today I reclaimed my narrative. As the prosecutor called my name, I met my family's eyes, not with anger, but with a calm resolve that shocked even me. They had watched me stumble over expectations and societal norms, their disappointment palpable every time I returned home without a degree in hand. But what they failed to see was the completion of my spirit and character, the strength that could only be born from the fire of experience and responsibility. The stares they exchanged were laced with confusion as I stood tall, unyielding against the shadows of their doubts. I no longer craved their approval. I had forged my own path amidst the chaos that surrounded me. The courtroom, once a place of foreboding, transformed into a battleground for my truth. I looked around at the faces of those who knew nothing of my journey beyond the surface, those who saw a dropout instead of a survivor. The weight of their judgments no longer felt heavy, it felt liberating. I spoke of the missions I'd led, the lives I'd shaped, and how I survived every storm that battered me, each word echoing with an authority that only came from years of defending not just my country, but my right to exist without apology. I didn't just fight for my nation, I fought for the girl who dared to dream beyond a degree. With every closing statement, the air in the room thickened, and it was clear that I wouldn't back down. I watched the bewilderment paint their faces, and in that moment, it dawned on me that acknowledgement had shifted. I was no longer the college dropout they whispered about. I was a warrior respected by my peers, someone who had risen above the noise. The prosecutor's final words were drowned by the realization of my own power, and I felt the chains of their expectations disintegrate, scattering like dust in the wind. Gone were the days of second-guessing my worth based on what others thought of me. Today I embraced the woman I've become, scars visible and stories intact, a testament to the journey I chose. As I walked out of that courtroom, the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden rays that danced upon my skin. In that moment, I understood that my journey was not a straight line but a series of winding paths, each teaching me resilience and strength. I raised my arms to the sky, allowing the sunlight to wrap around me like a warm embrace, symbolizing freedom and renewal. I was no longer defined by others, I was the author of my own story, standing proudly in the light of my truth. If you stayed with me until the end, thank you. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from.